Sunshine Superman, Jennifer Juniper story in his very own words. Try for the Sun, The Journey of Donovan is a deluxe 4-disc box set that includes more than 60 tracks. Every one of his hits, B-sides, rare album cuts, and previously unreleased studio and live recordings. Phew, you certainly packed them in. Also look for a DVD that features There Is an Ocean, the previously unreleased 1970 film, a much sought-after collector's item. Man, there's so much I want to talk to you about. But let's just start, since we mentioned the 65 Newport Folk Festival. What are your memories of that?
Gosh, it was extraordinary because in a quick succession of months, my pal Gypsy Dave and I had met Buffy Sainte-Marie, who introduced me to Joan Baez, who introduced me to Bob Dylan, who introduced me to the Beatles, all in the space of 6 months. Now, I knew that's where I wanted to be, in the new folk world, which was informing pop culture with meaningful lyrics. That's where I wanted to be. Joni took a shine to me. We danced a little, but that was as far as it went, honest. And Joni introduced me on the phone to Pete Seeger, who ran the Newport Folk Festival. Now, this was so exciting because she said, "This is the new voice. He's from Britain. His name's Donovan. He's got to be on the festival." So I got the seal of approval. I arrived in Newport and sang on stage with Joni. Bob was there, and he blew the world apart by going electric. This was 1965. Extraordinary times.
Man, a lot of people compared you to Bob Dylan. Was that a stifling comparison, or was that a complimentary? I mean, obviously, I'm sure it was complimentary in a way, but...
It was complimentary, but it was slightly confused because the real guy was Woody Guthrie.
Sure.
Who was Bob's great teacher and my own. And, of course, Woody Guthrie in America is so influential all the way through to Mellencamp, to Springsteen, to, well, Neil Young, all of us. So the comparison at first was a little confusing, but then when Bob and I met, it was clear. I was so different, and it helped us both. Anyway, he was very kind in supporting me, introducing me to the Beatles, as I say.
Right, and you became really good friends with.
Yeah, the Beatles and I and Gypsy, we found in each other the same sense of humor. We actually were isolated with this super fame and needed to loosen up. And I didn't realize it until many years later. A friend of mine said, "You know, you had more social, spiritual, and musical contact with the Beatles than any of your generation."
I believe that. A lot of people don't even realize. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I took it for granted that we just knew each other. But yeah, we hung out a lot.
And you actually wrote some of the lyrics for Yellow Submarine.
Yeah, I mean...
You inspired the White Album, the cover, correct?
Yeah.
That was your idea, right?
Yeah, and also that acoustic sound on the White Album was very influenced by what I was playing. Because when we went to India, the books say, the Beatles and I escaped from our fame. We actually returned to being students in an odd sort of way. We're in an ashram in India. The press follow us. They camp outside the ashram for 2 days. And I mean every press in the world, from all countries, until they go away and we're left to ourselves. Then out come the guitars. It's only acoustic guitars. We've got no Marshall amps. We've got no Fender equipment. It's just back to basics. And so the White Album, as George said, Sweet George, who's not with us anymore, George Harrison, he said, "You know, Donovan's all over the White Album."
God, you sound just like him.
Yeah. And so I love George, and I love John, I love Paul and Ringo, and we had some times in India that was so extraordinary. John asked me to teach him the guitar style of the great American family of folk music, Carter family, invented this style. John was a good student, he learned it. But it was so touching, Andy, when he turned to me and said, "How do I write a song about a childhood I never had?" You know, John lost his mother. He never had any contact with her. And he knew I wrote children's songs. And when he got this guitar style, he invented a whole new style of writing, and the song was Julia.
Oh, wow.
It was very touching. And John, when I left India, gave me a drawing. And he said, "Thank you very much for that guitar style and encouraging me to write that song about my mother." And he gave me a gift, and I still have it.
That's beautiful.
And it was a drawing of a dark-haired girl with her hand to her mouth in a secretive gesture. And I didn't realize until many years later that it was Yoko.
Wow.
John and Yoko were getting together about then. So the book tells a lot of very touching, intimate stuff. But the Beatles and I, we were like that.
In fact, doesn't Paul appear on Mellow Yellow? Isn't his voice on there?
Paul walks into the studio like we walked into each other's studios. Many people think he sang the quite rightly.
Right.
But that was me. But John and George and Paul, we would hang out at each other's sessions. Paul on Mellow Yellow's doing a little bit of that, and the Spike Milligan voice, you know, Mellow Yellow.
That's
he was
Paul.
doing the party piece. Yeah, I kind of miss those days. Fame overtook us and became very, very oppressive. And as the book explains, it became very difficult.
Well, let me ask you this. Are you still, hopefully, mad about Saffron?
I'm mad about Saffron.
I didn't
You know,
realize-
Saffron's mad about me.
That's great. Saffron is actually a cake. I always thought saffron was a girl.
Well, it's more than one meaning.
Oh.
Saffron is like the robe of the Buddhist as well. It's a saffron color.
Okay.
Of course, it's this cake that I mentioned that when I was a poor wandering boy with Gypsy Dave sleeping on the beaches at the age of 16, we'd go round to a little baker in 6 in the morning after waking up cold, and we'd go to the baker and we'd say, have you got any old cakes? And she'd give us these saffron cakes. So there's a cake in the story too, but Saffron's also a girl's name. You can take it or leave it.
You read all about a lot of girls, and we're going to talk more about the new Donovan box set and the autobiography, which is very, very steamy, let me tell you. Hanging with me today, Donovan. I am so happy to be back once again hanging with Donovan today, and we're going to get to these mini Sharpies and what we're going to do with them in a bit. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about the great new box set and your autobiography.
Come on then.
Try for the Sun, The Journey of Donovan celebrates Donovan's more than 40-year career in a deluxe 4-disc box set. In the autobiography of Donovan, The Hurdy-Gurdy Man, Donovan, in his own words, brings us into his world with the revealing stories about his emergence as one of the biggest names in folk music. So the Hurdy-Gurdy Man, actually the song you wrote is the Hurdy-Gurdy Man was referring to the Maharishi Yogi, correct?
Yeah, I was also referring to a very strange figure before the age of radio and television who used to wander from town to town with an instrument called the hurdy-gurdy.
The Hurdy-Gurdy.
And he'd swing it, and he'd turn it, and he'd tell the news and bring the stories from all over the country into every little village. So it was kind of a little bit of Maharishi and a little bit of a name for me, the traveling minstrel.
Of course, of course. I gotta say, this book, it's an autobiography, but it reads like a novel to me.
Good.
You're a tremendous writer.
Thank you, that's
I
what I
mean-
wanted. It was the hardest thing, because songs have come very easy to me from a very early age. My father read me poetry, as the book says, and I learned how to turn a ballad at the age of 14. That was easy. But writing prose was much more difficult. I've become very, very, very respectful of writers now. It takes a lot of work. It's the longest song I've ever written.
It reads like a great movie, honestly, I gotta say. Maybe you should consider a HBO series or something.
My goodness, do they dramatize books? Do they?
I don't know, they should. It's really great, and
course
there's
they do.
even a little steamy sex in this book, too, I gotta say that.
It's sex, drugs, rock and roll, but one extra ingredient, philosophy.
Philosophy, that's right.
Oh yeah, because the 60s was driven by a mission. And the mission was really, out of the bohemian cafes came meaningful lyrics. An enormous amount of new meaningful songs came, which have informed our lives and benefited us tremendously. And I was part of that, and I'm so proud, and the book celebrates that.
It certainly does. Do you think there'll be a volume 2?
You know, when people say, then what happened after
Yeah.
1970, I say, look, I wrote more into the 70s and 80s and 90s, but it started getting so many pages, I put it down and stopped at 1970. I think there will be another book.
Yeah, well, there's always the 50th anniversary, too, you know?
Yeah, it might take that long to write it.
That's
yeah.
right. What else is next for you? Any new music on the
Okay.
horizon? Or?
Well, this is the 40th, as you have
right.
described, the book, the box set, and the tour. But there's a new album in me, I released a new album last year, a kind of a cult item called Beat Cafe. But there's a new album in me, and it's very, very excitingly like Hurdy-Gurdy Man, Barabba-Jaggle. It has Season of the Witch sounds in it. I'm going to make a rock album next year.
Excellent.
And so I'm doing this tour, coast to coast, in late 2005, and returning in the late spring to America. But the new album will be out probably the late summer.
Oh, we'll look forward to that, and I hope you'll come back for that, too.
I'd love to.
All right, wonderful. Before you go, if you don't mind, would you grab one of these mini Sharpies and sign your album, The Sunshine
will,
Superman?
of
Look
course.
at you there.
Well, that, you know, this is extraordinary. My image was presented by the great photographer Barry Feinstein. Now, Barry was the one responsible for the early Dylan photography, which you see on the new Dylan DVDs that are out now. Barry Feinstein, cool photographer.
Wow.
I will sign this to who?
I didn't even realize until I read the book that Ione Skye is your daughter,
Ione
the
Skye
actress.
is
And
my
boy,
daughter.
do you look like her there.
Yeah. Well, I hope she looks like me as well.
Well, yeah, that's true. I guess it works that way, right?
Well, who shall I sign this to? Amy?
No, sign it to VH1 Classic.
Okay.
We would love that. We
Okay.
display all sorts of record
Good.
albums signed by
Cool.
our great guests here in the studio, throughout our studio, and we would just love that.
Oh, it's
Thank
my
you
pleasure.
so much.
I feel so much at home in here, and I've seen it on the box so many times. I said, one of these days I'm going to be on that show.
Oh, you're so
And
sweet.
here
Thank
I
you,
am.
Donovan. Thanks for
Here
hanging
I
with me.
am. Here you are.
Best of luck to you.
VH1 Classic. Thank you, Amy.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye. 2 times.
Yeah, the European. See you next time. Bye.